Oh boy. Okay. I could have totally gotten this done at any point within the past, 3 months. So, forgive me for holding back on this one for so long. But, on the bright side, because I took so long to make this, we can actually add some of the new units onto here. So, this is your boy Tacho, of course, and we are going to be talking about a tier list today for the heroic Grail units. So basically anyone that you can win from the Tempest Trials or from a Grand Hero battle. We're going to be talking about those units and which ones I think are definitely going to steal the show as plus 10 merge projects if you're looking to build somebody. Now there is of course a very slow drip feed when it comes to heroic Grails. So it takes a very long time. It's like months and months of hoarding up Grails to be able to go for a plus 10 on these units. So you're really going to want to make sure you use your resources well and choose the right person to go for the plus 10 on. And that is what this tier list is going to try to help you guys out with. So of course, if you guys have seen the other versions of this tier list, then you know that you guys always have an input on this. And I just love reading the comments and seeing you guys' opinions on the units and what kind of changes you might make if you were the ones making the tier list. All of your comments help, and they also help me update the tier list and make it more accurate. So feel free to leave comments down below and let me know what you think. And I will do my best to read all of them and try to respond to all of them. Also, in general, if you just want more of an in-depth explanation on certain units, then go ahead and ask questions and I will try to answer them. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything in the video because I don't want this video to go on for 2 hours or however long it would take to really discuss every single thing. I'm just going to cover the basics and just talk about a select few units here. So comments basically are going to be your best friend here. Alright, but without any further ado, we're going to start things off at the very top with the S tier. And in my personal opinion, I think the S tier units here are basically the crown jewels that you can obtain in the Heroic Grail shop. Basically, anyone is going to benefit from a plus 10 on these guys, whether you're a whale or not. So, very good stuff. And the first unit we have is the Ninja Hana. Now, Ninja Hana is spectacular in terms of her stat line. She's basically Duo Alm, but free to play. And of course, just missing some of the perf things that Duo Alm comes with, like Scepter of Love and Lunar Flash. And then she also does not have that juicy duo skill that recovers all that HP and then removes status conditions and stuff like that. But regardless, the inheritable axes are very good. Like, we've got Dex Swabber and we've got Ninja Masakari and so on and so forth. So Hana being able to abuse those things with her superb stat line is definitely enough to keep her in the S tier, I think. Also, she scores in the 180 bracket. So her score is basically as high as units like Surtur and Legendary Tiki, which is going to be fantastic for modes like Arena. Okay, next up we have Winter Felix, who is our most recent prize unit. And Winter Felix, maybe I'm overrating him a little bit by having him in the S tier, but I do think he is in here. Bows are just outrageous at this point. We got Spendthrift Bow and Helm Bow, etc. And then he's also got access to all of those really good brand new fighter skills, like Slick Fighter and Daring Fighter and Crafty Fighter. The fighter skills are really cheap, so being able to have them on Winter Felix is definitely going to be very good. Also, just like Hana, he scores in the 180 bin, so he scores as high as units like Surtur, except on the upside, he's also a ranged unit. So, imagine having good scoring ranged units for Arena mode. It makes things so much easier, so definitely I think Felix has a lot of value. He's also very good in Pawns of Loki because of his weapon type and color. So if you're trying to just flood your team with bow units to get that maximum bonus, Felix could be a pretty good choice for that. Next up, we have Brunya. There's not really too much to say about Brunya. She was in the S tier in previous versions of this list, and she still holds up really well. She's very good as a carry in Aether Raids, as she can hard tank most magic units, and then she can negate her own penalties, which are very common in Aether Raids, so she's very good. Then we have Rolf, and I believe on the last version of this list, Rolf was either in the A tier or A plus tier, I can't remember exactly, but I mean, you guys have seen my defense team. When you have Budding Bow on any of these cavalry bow units, they just get so over the top. So I think definitely Rolf is going to shoot all the way up into the S tier. It also helps that he's colorless and he has the same BST overall as Wrath and Python. Previously, you could have argued that Wrath and Python were a little bit better because they had access to Ivies. But now that we have the trait fruits, probably the biggest change ever since the last version of this tier list, I think Rolf is just going to outshine both of them. So Rolf is pretty much the best option we have to build for a cavalry bow unit, free to play or otherwise, so even whales can benefit from a plus 10 on Rolf. His stat line is just very solid overall, good bulk, good speed, and his attack is a little bit on the low end, but that doesn't really matter too much to him. And again, being colorless just gives him a clear advantage over both Wrath and Python. Then we have Naysala, and there's not really much to say. This year has basically been the year of the flyers, where we've gotten all these crazy flyer exclusive skills, like Dive Bomb and the Rain skills and Guard Bearing. So I think Naysala definitely holds his own, and there's no reason not to build him if you like him. There's also a whole bunch of crazy shenanigans you can pull in Aether Raids with these beast units. If you get them to transform and they can move 3 spaces, like on a map such as the mountain map or something like that, Naysala and Tibarns are very good to have in there. And with the advent of Ivies now, you can go plus speed on Naysala and make it real easy for him to get that plus 7 true damage he gets on his weapon. So Naysala is amazing. And then we have the Dancing Eldigan. This guy is also really good. He's probably the best free-to-play dancer in the entire game. I would even argue he's better than Peony just because in Aether Raids you can buff up his defense and HP to a point where Bride, Fiorm, and Milla are not going to be able to isolate him. So that's very good for a dancer, of course. He also has utility being a flyer type, so you can run things like ground orders or flyer formation or aerobatics, etc. And he's going to be able to really just jump around and pull off some annoying tactics. So the Dancing Eldigan is a very good choice for the plus 10 if you're looking to invest in a dancer. And then finally we've got Aversa and Ashnard, 2 red flyers. Now Aversa is still the only buildable red tome flyer that we have access to, and I find it awesome that she's better than the majority of the ones that are locked to 5-star banners. Because of course she's got Aversa's Knight, and she's just the queen of inflicting panic on the foes, so that's really good. And she's also awesome in Pawns of Loki, where you can debuff all of the foes in there, inflict -3 to all stats and panic, and it's going to make it a little bit easier for your units to just have a smooth time going through that mode. Same thing with Ashnard, pretty much. Like I said, it's been the year of the flyers, so he gets rain skills and guard bearing and dive bomb. Not that you would run dive bomb on him, but guard bearing could be pretty clutch. Or Wyvern Flight even. That's not too bad for Ashnard. And then Gurgurant is like god tier in Pawns of Loki, because you can inflict some crazy debuffs in there. So Ashnard and Aversa, they definitely hold up in the S tier, I think. And like I said before, the units in the S tier are pretty much the cream of the crop. So if you're going for a plus 10 and you care about the meta or anything like that, I think these are definitely going to be your best choices. So moving on to the A plus tier now. I actually added this tier in the last version of the tier list just to give a little bit more of a separation gap between A tier and S tier. because it was a little bit crowded in there. So in the A+ tier, we're going to start things off with the Sword Trio in Nemesis, Itsuki, and Astrum. And honestly, I feel like Nemesis is the best of the three. His perf weapon is just completely nuts, as long as you're able to meet that once per turn condition. And then it also gives him a conditional attack and defense up 6, assuming you have units above 90% health. Shouldn't be that difficult to pull that off, especially if Nemesis is going to be the one doing all the fighting. And then he gets 45% damage reduction, again unconditionally, except it's only for the first combat during each phase. So he doesn't need to worry about any stat checks to get his damage reduction, which is a clear advantage over everybody else that needs to rely on speed or defense or something like that. And then the guy just hits like a freaking train. His attack stat is really good. The only downside to Nemesis is that he doesn't have the 180 BST. They shafted him out of any super boons, which would have given him enough of a push to get there. So it's really unfortunate that they did Nemesis this dirty, and he ends up scoring as high as both Astrum and Itsuki, even though he should technically be scoring higher than them. But what can I say? He's not a waifu, so they tend to favor waifus more, unfortunate as it may be. And then Itsuki and Astrum, there's not really too much else to say about them. They're both really good infantry swords, and I've explained them before in the previous versions of this list, so if you want to hear a more in-depth explanation, then leave a comment. Alright, next up we have the Kid Minerva and Volter. They're both really good as well. Basically, after his refine, Volter is like a mini version of Mini Minerva, as corny as that may sound. But his weapon virtually does the same thing, it just turns him into a giant stat ball and inflicts guard on the foes. Unfortunately, Volter does take chip damage, unlike Kid Minerva, so if you're going to run something like Dive Bomb on him, you have to be careful with his HP. It's probably going to dip too low in a lot of situations. We did just get the Mystic Boost Sacred Seal though, so I guess if you wanted to offset the chip damage he takes from his weapon, you could probably try doing something like that. But I think you're better off just running a different Sacred Seal anyway. Maybe like a Brazen one, or Swift Sparrow, or something like that. And then instead of Dive Bomb, you just run Desperation, so it's not really a big deal. But pretty much both Minerva and Volter are amazing. They also have access to Odd Tempest, so if you want them to be able to move 3 spaces in a turn, similar to Naesala and the other flying beast units, you could totally do that as well. It's just a little inconsistent compared to the beasts because it's only for odd numbered turns, but still in the player's hands it's very powerful. Okay, next up we have Petrine, and Petrine is one of the better player phase cavalry units we've gotten. Her stat line is really surprising for a Grand Hero battle unit, and then her weapon has effective against beasts, which is very rare. It just sucks that she's blue and Freya is green, because one of the main ways to beat a plus 10 Freya, if you have to fight her in something like Arena Assault, is just to clap her with effective damage. And it would have been nice if Petrine was red, I guess, but I mean, of course she was going to be a lance unit, because that's what she was in Tellius. So I guess it makes sense, but again, I would have preferred if she was red or something like that. Either way though, she's very good. Flame Lance is a very good weapon. It also gives her the ability to target res while her HP is above half, so she can deal a little bit extra damage to certain units that focus more on defense than res. And next up we have Luis, who is basically just a mini version of Rolf. Her stats aren't quite as good, and her speed is not quite as good, but it really doesn't matter. These cavalry bow units have gone so over the top, especially with all the changes they made to 8th of Raids. If you're trying to build a defense team, then I think there's no reason not to go for a cav line, especially if you care about winning and just maintaining your score. So I can't possibly have this list with Luis any higher than A+. But her defense is really crappy, so she does come under more fire when it comes to physical attacks than Rolf will. So just keep that in mind. And then next up we have George. He was a blue bow infantry type unit. And it's unfortunate that Felix is color sharing with him, but George is still very good in his own right. He's tied with Jamke for the highest base attack out of any free-to-play bow unit. So if you're interested in running Brave Bow builds or something like that, George could be very nice with it. He also has his own perf weapon, which is going to grant +5 attack to allies in 2 spaces. A pretty ridiculous attack buff, honestly. And you can combo it with joint drive attack and then maybe even drive attack the Sacred Seal and just get some really crazy power out of his support partners. So just some things to consider. But he's also no slouch on defense either, because his defenses are pretty good. And then he also inflicts -5 attack on the foes. So George is not bad. And next up we have the 180 BST trio in Ina, Kalik, and Flame Emperor. And unfortunately, unlike Hana and Felix, I feel like these guys are just a slight step down. Ina's super boon happens to be in speed, so if you want her to score 180, then you have to go for a very unoptimal Ivy choice. It would have been way better if it was defense or res, or even attack for her. But Instance was like, nope, go for plus speed. And Ina really doesn't care about speed at all. You'd probably just want to go for Dragon's Ire on her in the B slot anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. But otherwise, she is a very solid unit. And at the very least, she does have color advantage against Thrasir, who is the most common unit that has effective against dragons in Aether Raids. Not that I would recommend trying to bait Thrasir with Ina, but maybe she could manage to pull it off, given that she has color advantage. And then next up we have Kalik, and personally I just feel like Ninja Hana is better than him. She has so much more speed that she's capable of running a wider variety of builds more efficiently, whereas Kalik is pretty much just all attack and then all bulk. Now his speed isn't awful, and he does have a super boon in speed as well. So if you wanted to run like a quad build with him and give him Ninja Masakari, you might be able to make something happen with that. But again, like I said, I just think Hana has a better stat line overall, and she's going to make better use of things like Spurn 3 or anything that relies on speed, and she definitely has a way better chance of going for the quads with the Ninja Axe. So I think Kalik is probably just A+, and you would normally build Hana over him unless he's one of your favorite characters. And then last we have Flame Emperor, who has the 180 BST as well. But being an armored unit, you have to worry about effective against armors from virtually half of the threats you're going to fight in arena mode, as well as that one range mobility. So it's a little awkward using Flame Emperor, but at the very least the armor's skills are very powerful, like Slick Fighter and Crafty Fighter. And then the axes are very good as well, like Deck Swabber, which could be very good on Flame Emperor. So still not a bad choice for the +10, but I would say you may want to focus on one of the other 180 BST units instead. And then finally, we finish off A+ tier with the dagger units. So daggers are of course very powerful. Gangrel has a really awesome weapon where he's gaining true damage based on his res stat. So the typical idea is to just pump up his attack and res at the same time with stuff like Mirror Impact, and then have him deal as much damage as possible. He's also very good on infantry pulse teams where you can charge up either Iceberg or Glacies and go for a one-shot. So Gangrel's definitely good. And then Kranya tries to go for the Vantage one-hit KO combo, where she's free to have Vantage on her weapon, and then you can give her Special Spiral and Ruptured Sky. The only issue with Kranya, though, is that she does seem to lack in stopping power every so often, where her attack isn't quite high enough to always guarantee the one-shots. So that's why I dropped her out of the S tier into A+. And honestly, she could probably drop even lower into the A tier as well. I don't really see Kranya as often as I did in the old days. So let me know in the comments section what you guys think of Kranya. And also, let me know what you guys think of Jafar and Cecilia. They're both really the same unit for the most part. Only difference is that Jafar is green and Cecilia is colorless. And being colorless just comes in handy more if you're going to run the Broadleaf Fan Vantage combo, because that means you're not going to get stopped by red units as easily. But then Jafar being green and having a better BST gives him an edge in arena mode where he can run something like Pegasus Carrot. And all of his bonus stat points that he has over Cecilia have basically been dumped into speed. So he's free to run Daring Fighter and a couple of other builds that you wouldn't really run on Cecilia. But for the most part, the two units are virtually identical. There's not too big of a performance gap between them, so I decided to keep them together. But I feel like they could both drop down into A tier at this point. They feel a little bit dated, but I'll leave that up to you guys in the comments section. Let me know how you feel about them. And then next up we have the A tier, which I think is probably the last relevant meta tier as far as which units see the most common play. So if you wanted to compare this tier list to, I don't know, like a Pokemon tier list where they have overused and underused and uber tier and things like that, the A tier on this list would probably be like borderline in between overused and underused. So they're still kind of meta, but they're very niche in terms of what roles they play. And we have Ursula, who is just very good on Cavline teams. If you're running debuffs on your team or a rally trap with a ruse skill, her weapon has the broadleaf fan effect, so she can deal some serious damage. And she's also effective against cavalry, which is very good in Aether raids. Then we have Ethlyn, who is a staff unit. And staff units have been getting some pretty cool tools lately, like Odd Recovery, which we just got on Sephiran. And the nice thing about Odd Recovery is that you can technically heal off isolation with it, but it's only on odd numbered turns. So if the foes are trying to inflict isolation on you in the first place, they can totally just wait for an even numbered turn and catch you off guard. And we also just got the Mystic Boost Sacred Seal as well. So if the cavalry staff units were ever in competition with the cavalry bow units, then the Mystic Boost Seal, I think, is definitely going to be the deal breaker, and the cavalry bow units are just way better. Also, the bow units are effective against flying, and a majority of the mythic heroes have happened to be flying type units. So my opinion is that the cavalry bow units are just better for Cavlines, but Ethlyn being a pretty good cavalry staff unit with one of the better stat lines, I think, is definitely in her favor. Then we've got Pan and Kemph, who are basically melee calves that can attack from one range away. People like Kemph a lot because his weapon just does a whole bunch of crazy effects. Like, it's going to inflict the flash effect on the foes, so they're not going to be able to counterattack. And then it also does Poison Strike as well. So he does a lot of chip damage, and he stops the foes from counterattacking. But it's always going to be a question of whether you value Eliwood's supreme ability to just go in and attack and then immediately ramp into Gale Force, versus Kemph's ability to go ahead and attack and then inflict some crazy statuses. So it's pretty much up to preference on whether you prefer one over the other. And then Pan is basically in the same boat as Eliwood, where she has the impact effect built in, and her weapon is just turning her into a big stat ball. But unlike Eliwood, she doesn't have the ramp effect with Blazing Durandal, so it's a little bit trickier for Pan to actually manage to ramp into her special attacks. So I would have her in the A tier alongside Kemph. And then finally we have the Masked Marth, who just recently got a refine for Sealed Falchion. Now, Masked Marth has the same stat line as the 5-star exclusive Lucina, but the bad news is that Lucina just got a Resplendent alt, so she has +2 to all stats that she can hold over this Masked Marth. But we still have the advent of IVs for the Heroic Grail units now, so Masked Marth actually doesn't hold up too badly, and that Sealed Falchion refine gives her like virtually +10 to all stats, effective against dragons, and then it negates the foe's follow-up. So a very powerful weapon. And that pretty much covers us for most of the meta options. From the B tier and below, I think the B tier we can call like mid tier, where things in B tier, you may get some niche uses out of them if you want to build them up. Like, for example, we have Arden in the B tier, and Arden has the absolute highest HP in the game. So if you're running him in a mode like Pawns of Loki, Arden can actually have some pretty good value in there with his ridiculous HP, but you're not really going to get so much mileage out of Arden in other modes. Then we also have Navarre, who is the most consistent infantry Gale Force unit in the game. His weapon makes it so easy for him to just start the fight off with a Gale Force ready. But again, that is a very niche role, and it's hard to really quantify how efficient that's going to be in most of the other modes besides Aether Raids. We also have Iago in here, who is like a light version of Aversa. Pretty funky, because when Iago first came out, I thought he was going to be better than Aversa, but it's just a little too inconsistent with his effect debuffs. You're never going to be able to tell if the foes are going to be adjacent or not. So he does have some consistency issues, whereas Aversa, it's just always the exact same thing. And then there's Jamke, who has basically the same base attack as George, and access to Ivy Fruits definitely helped him out a bit, because you're free to go plus attack on him now, and really drive home how good those Brave Bow builds are going to be. But again, that's just one good thing that he can do, and I feel like the other units that are higher up on these tier lists are not one-trick ponies where there's only one good build for them or one good strategy for them, and they're just very versatile overall. So I decided to keep him down here in the B tier. Also, Renea, who is a dancer that's free to play, she's not quite as good as Eldigan, because you can't really raise her defense or HP to the point where she's basically immune from Milla and Bride Fiorm. But she does come with Silver Goblet, and Silver Goblet is not available on the other mage colors. So by having that, and then running Distant Guard in the C slot and the Sacred Seal slot, she can basically grant plus 12 defense and res to allies in 2 spaces against any ranged opponents, which is a ridiculous amount of support. So I think Renea is still pretty cool, but not really justifiable to build over Eldigan. And just another example, we have Legion as well, whose weapon is pretty bananas if you're able to inflict debuffs on the foes and panic. And even if you can't inflict debuffs, then Legion's Axe still has a couple of other effects that he can just activate consistently, like the attack and speed bonus and the special ramping. But are you really going to build Legion over Ninja Hana or Kalik, who can score in the 180 BST bin, and then they're going to be really good for you in modes like Arena and Mjolnir Strike and stuff? So the B tier, like I said, is basically the mid tier, where the units do have some good tricks up their sleeve, but they're just not quite as optimal overall as the A tier and above options. And finally, in the C and D tier, these are the subpar units, basically. I mean, it's really hard for me to say subpar when we have all these flying units right in the front. Like Flora, Cormag, Cynthia, Travant, Jerome, Har, Michaelis, Narshan. Like, all of these flying units just have access to some of the craziest skills in the game now, like Rains and Odd Tempest and stuff, that you could really just make the case that they should be in the B tier just on the merit of being flyers. But I don't want to meme on you guys too much and just make it so the tiers don't really make too much sense, unless you're like really nitpicky about things. So I'm keeping them in the C tier for now. Let me know in the comments section what you think of flyers overall, and if you think, just by merit, if they should be in higher tiers or not. I'm going to leave that up to you guys. And really, the only other big thing to talk about in C tier is Oliver, who just got his refine not too long ago. And Oliver's refine, I mean, best refine in the game, am I right? But real talk though, it's not going to make him like crazy good or anything like that. He definitely did get a lot better, and he can actually jump to allies without being on any HP requirement. So he has the most powerful jump effect in the game technically, except it's only limited to the Heron units. So already that's very restrictive, and otherwise his weapon is only giving him a bunch more attack and res, which he already excelled in the first place. But I digress. Oliver, his refine was good enough to take him out of D tier and put him in the C tier. And that's basically all there is to say about the tier list for now. Overall, I'm pretty happy with most of the placements myself, but there's no way everyone is going to agree on the same thing. So feel free to voice your grievances in the comment section down below and roast me if you think there's some bad decisions in here. I welcome all the feedback, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. But that's all for now, and this is your boy Tacho signing out. So thanks so much for watching the video, guys, and giving me like 40 minutes of your time, or however long this video went on for. But I really appreciate the support, and I will catch y'all again on the flip side.